Hello, this is Reggie York. This is a presentation on measurement in evaluative research for the human services. I'm at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Let's talk a little bit about what this presentation is about. It's about how measurement is guided by evaluation objectives and the definition of the target behavior being treated. There's a special connection between those three things. The key themes of consistency, which refers to reliability, and accuracy, which refers to validity in measurement. In general, we might call these two things together credibility. In other words, can we trust the tool we've used to measure what we're trying to measure? Third, finding statistical standard measures or developing your own tool is the third major theme here. You might say we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We'll talk about that later. Let's connect the dots between the idea of the definition of the target behavior you're treating, the objective you're trying to achieve, and the measurement tool you're using. Just use an example here. Definition. Let's say that we decide that housing vulnerability is the state of being without a home or vulnerability to losing one's own home. That's your definition, okay? Our objective, reduce housing vulnerability. You want to make housing vulnerability lower, which means better in a way, the client being better. Here's a way we might measure it. A scale with the following categories. Your score is 0 if you're living in your own home without imminent danger of losing it, meaning you have no housing vulnerability, score 0. You get a score of 1 if you're living in your own home, but you're in imminent danger of losing it. You've just gotten an eviction order, for example. You get a score of 2 if you're living in a temporary home that is not your own. You're sleeping on someone's couch as a friend or something like that. 3, which is the highest level of vulnerability, is you're not living in a home at all. You're on the street, in a car, or something of that nature. So you see here, you have a definition, you have an objective, and you have a measurement. You measure what your objective is. Your objective is related to your concept that is defined. Let's talk now about measuring client progress. The first place to start is the review of the outcome objectives. Your objectives should have been stated in such a way as to be feasible for measurement. Don't say your objective is to place clients into employment unless you plan to measure employment. Maybe employment is your goal, but something else is your objective. For example, you might have an objective of improved knowledge of job-seeking techniques. If that's your objective, you should measure that. So make sure that what you're saying is your objective, that is your objective, is the thing you are measuring specifically, not something generally related to it, but that thing itself. Let's think in terms of goals, objective, and process. We need to distinguish between those concepts because it's easy to get them a little bit confused when you're writing up your report, designing your study, and so forth. Let's say, I'm using an example, the goal, improve self-sufficiency for emotionally disabled veterans. In other words, you want to move emotionally disabled veterans to a state of self-sufficiency. That is to say, they can take care of themselves without need of a residential treatment facility or something of that nature. That's your goal. That's not what you're going to measure because the goal is that long-term thing you're trying to accomplish. Let's talk about the objective. An objective might be reduce depression for our current clients who are emotionally disabled veterans. So what are we going to measure? Of course, we're going to measure depression, not self-sufficiency, but depression. Now, one part of the process might be helping the client to understand the connection between types of thoughts and the feelings that result. Perhaps when we're talking about the kind of treatment we're using, we might say that's one of the things we're trying to accomplish. But this is process. It's not something, unless it's something you're going to measure, you would not call this your objective. How was the behavior defined? How does child abuse include verbal acts of aggression? How are self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-efficacy different? How do you distinguish between, say, depression and anxiety? Maybe depression is sadness, listlessness, pessimism, suicidal thoughts, and so forth. Perhaps anxiety, on the other hand, is apprehension, worrying about things, temptation to run away, and so forth. Those are different, so you need to be clear about what it is that you're defining. What difference does a good measure make? You want to measure client behavior accurately, that is to say, reliably, or with reliability or validity. This means it should operate consistently, which means reliability. It means it correlates with other ways of measuring the same thing. Now, the reliability thing, going back one step there, things like doing a test and retest reliability would be a way of examining that kind of thing. There are other techniques for that if you look them up somewhere. The next one is that does it tend to correspond to or correlate with other ways of measuring the same thing? If there's another tool for measuring the same thing as your tool, when they're both given to the same people, is there a positive correlation that's significant? In that case, you would have some evidence for the validity or credibility of the tool you are using. Let's look at the measurement tool. Sometimes you have something that is simple to measure, like school grades or attendance at school. That's a pretty simple thing to measure. Sometimes you need to measure a social or psychological variable like self-esteem or depression. That becomes more complicated. In each case, you have the task of collecting the data for each client in your particular study. Let's look at this particular question. What does this mean? You give a depression scale to a group of people one day and give them the same scale 1 week later, and you find the correlation between the two administrations of the same scale is not statistically significant. Let's say you give it to your classroom, depression scale to your classroom today. You gave it to them, you give the same scale to them again next week. You don't find a good positive correlation between the two. Well, that would say that this tool is not credible. It's not showing that the two scales are measuring the same thing. Therefore, at least one is probably not accurate. What does this mean? You develop a scale to measure self-esteem among adolescents. You just give the scale to a group of adolescents. You also give them an established scale that is in a measurement book. You examine the correlation of the scores on your scale and the other scale and find the correlation is not statistically significant. Again, that would be evidence that your tool is not very valid or accurate. Let's look at the question of whether you should have whether you should use a standard scale or an individualized scale. Things like school grades are simple. Don't need to worry about standard scales or individualized scales. It's just something that's recorded and it's very tangible. If you're measuring a common mental health behavior like depression, anxiety, self-esteem, substance abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, and so forth, you should review sources of standardized scales. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. Why should you do that? If you need to measure something unique for your client, you should consider, of course, an individualized scale. There are a number of tools that have been developed. Here's just one example. The Adult Adolescent Parenting Inventory measures parenting and child-rearing attitudes. Some of the items on the scale that ask for whether you agree with it or not is parents will spoil their children by picking them up and comforting them when they cry. Obviously, if you agree with that, then you've got some problems with regard to your parenting attitudes and thinking. The next one, parents have a responsibility to spank their child when she or he misbehaves. That again would not generally be considered a good behavior. So there are a number of things on this inventory. So people are asked to indicate how much they agree with each of these things. That is used then to compose a score for parenting. That's just one of many, 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 many examples of a tool. The HARE self-esteem scale measures self-esteem among school-age children, specifically designed for school-age children. Some of the items would be, I have at least as many friends as other people my age. People my age often pick on me. Other people wish they were like me. Those are the items on it. As you can see, some of those indicate good self-esteem and some other do not. So when your agreement with these items are scored, they are reverse scored based on whether you're agreeing with a positive statement or a negative statement. The advantages of this standardized scale, they have normally been developed by someone who has expertise in the behavior and has studied what it means. You are probably not, if you're not going to have the time, maybe not even the expertise, to think through all the nuances of what you're trying to measure and come up with a really good tool. So having an expert to do it is good for you. Also, standardized scales have normally been tested for reliability and validity. Sources, there are a number of sources for that, like the Mental Measurement Yearbook, tests and print. There's a book called Measures for Clinical Practice and Research by Corcoran and Fisher. And there are all kinds of sources, so you can look at that. Well, you could just go to the internet and ask for measures of whatever it is you're trying to measure, and you'll probably find some good sources there. Let's consider the fact that you might want to develop your own measure because a standardized scale just doesn't work for you. So if you do that, you should review principles of measurement as you consider developing your own scale and have other people to test it for you. Ask them to look at it and so forth. Example, don't present double-barrel questions that pose different themes in one item. Another example is be sure that each item measures the variable as you have defined it. Also be sure that the response categories are both mutually exclusive and exhaustive. If you don't know what those mean, then look them up. I don't have time to go into them in this particular presentation. Right now I want you to we're going to do a review, so I want you to hit the pause button and then answer these questions and then come back to me and I'll give you the answers. Okay, number one, greater guidance comes from B, the definition of the target behavior. Excuse me for that. In regard to question one, the answer is B, definition. Question two, the answer is A, finding a significant correlation between your tool and another one. Okay, let's look at another one. Again, hit the pause button, go over these questions, and then come back to me. Okay, I assume you're back now. Look at the first one. The first one is false. It's the reverse. The question number, question number 3 is false. Question 4 is true. Question 5 is also true. If you have problems with that, go back and review the content. Well, I'm glad you've been with me here today. I hope this helps you in your thinking about measurement.